We are fortunate to have three of these outstanding researchers to give us a brief overview of their work and a preview of how NJIT will be a leader in solving the complex problems of sustainability. Our first speaker is Dr. Eric Fortune, an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences. Dr. Fortune is a renowned biologist who is deeply interested in how brains control behavior. His work has been featured in prestigious journals such as Science, the Journal of Neuroscience, and Trends in Neurosciences. He conducts research on highly specialized animals that are uniquely suited for the study of the mechanisms of behavior. These animals, electric fish in the Amazon Basin and plain-tailed wrens in the cloud forests of the equatorial Andes, have brought Dr. Fortune to Ecuador to conduct research in the animals' natural habitats. It is these experiences that bring Dr. Fortune to us today.
Well, thank you, Dean Deek, for the introduction, and I also want to say thanks to President Bloom, to Provost Gatley, and to members of the board for giving me the opportunity today to talk about my research and teaching program that I'm both very proud of and passionate about. Now, to be sure, I never, ever would have expected that my research would take me to the area of sustainability or the ability to, there we go. I am an accidental environmentalist. My research focuses on neuroscience. But like the best things in science, my research took me in unexpected and unplanned ways into a new field, specifically environmental monitoring, which is one of the components of successful efforts in sustainability. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my research program and how this interacts with the field of sustainability. Now, before we can start, we need to have a definition of what sustainability means. And it's really quite simple. Sustainability is simply planning for the future. Of course, that's not a new idea. People have been planning for the future forever, but with the assumption that the resources that are available today would continue to be present into the future. But now we recognize, and sustainability focuses on the issue that there are limited resources in the environment, in the natural world, and in order to plan for the future, we need to do this in consideration of those limitations. So this is not a new idea. In fact, what we're seeing today, sustainability really is just a renaissance of ideas, first expressed 200 years ago by Malthus. The idea that there are limited resources in the world and that we have to be careful about caring for them in order to sustain today's lifestyle into the future. Now, my small corner of sustainability is environmental monitoring. And simply, I measure what resources do we have in the environment. Now, environmental monitoring is a critical component of sustainability because it is the metric by which we measure whether or not our efforts in sustainability are successful or not. Now, sustainability is clearly an interdisciplinary effort. Of course, it's going to require advances in the engineering and technology, and it also requires that we increase our knowledge of the natural world. But perhaps most importantly, it requires that we educate people about their role in sustaining a new future, how they will participate as people sustaining current conditions into the future. Now, the reason I was attracted to New Jersey Institute of Technology and specifically to the Department of Biology is because both have written down clear plans for how they're going to address these extremely complex interdisciplinary problems. They have an integrated multidisciplinary program by which they are going to address these programs, both in terms of research and in teaching. And the teaching component specifically includes hands-on experiences being the cornerstone of the educational effort. And together, these will lead to solutions towards sustainability. And I find this an incredibly exciting part of being part of NJIT and the Department of Biology. So, how is it that I come to doing this work in environmental monitoring. Well, my real day job is called neuroethology, which means that I study how animals behave. What are the neural or brain mechanisms by which animals do interesting things? How am I talking? How are birds flying? And so it's really the behavioral side of this research that has led me into this program of environmental monitoring, one of the components of sustainability. So ever since I was a kid, I've been interested in behavior. I'm interested in everything about behavior. How did these behaviors evolve? What are these animals using these behaviors for? And what my laboratory focuses on are the mechanisms by which animals achieve these behavioral performances. Now, these behavioral performances are amazing. No engineered system can achieve the sort of flexibility and robustness that animals can in their behaviors. So in my laboratory, my students, they begin by observing behavior and then quantifying it in a very detailed way, and then use insights gleaned from behavior to start studying the brain. So we can start with the most basic observations here to do this same process. So, for instance, we can watch all of these animals doing these behaviors, and we know that all of them are using sensory information to control themselves. So they're using vision, touch, perhaps other sensory modalities in order to control their behavior. And we also know that, where's my fabulous laser pointer? This is the best laser pointer. Okay, so you agree with me, great. These animals' brains are also controlling their bodies. So we can sort of divide the neural world into two components. How does it process sensory information, and how does it generate signals for motor control? So let's do that. So how does the brain work? Well, there are these little sensory receptors that are embedded in your periphery, in your skin, in your eyes, in your ears. And your ears are little hair cells that translate sound into electrical impulses. There are little receptors in the back of your eye, rods and cones, and when light hits them, they change the amount of electrical impulses that they generate, and little receptors in your skin. So if I push on my skin right here, the receptors might start producing more of these little electrical impulses that are illustrated here, and those will communicate to my brain that something is happening there. And so if you imagine all of the receptors on your body, they're producing a spatial temporal pattern of these little electrical pulses that go into your brain. And this spatial temporal pattern of electrical pulses coming from the receptors encode everything that you've ever felt, perceived, sensed in your life. This is everything. This is sensation. Now, on the motor side, the same thing is happening, but in the opposite direction. The brain is generating a spatial temporal pattern of little electrical pulses that go out to specific muscles, and when these pulses occur, they cause your muscles to contract and control all of your behavior. So everything you've ever done, my speaking, you wiggling in your seat, whatever it is, has been controlled by a spatial temporal pattern of these electrical impulses. And people in my laboratory, my students, are trying to decode this spatial temporal pattern and understand how the brain functions. Now, to be sure, this is a very difficult problem, and in order to solve this problem, scientists in many laboratories across the world, similar to mine, go and find in the natural world animals that have unique behavioral adaptations that allow us to study the way these spatial temporal patterns are used to control behavior. Yeah, that's right. So the animals that I work on are weakly electric fish, and they're found throughout the Amazon basin. And it turns out people have been studying these animals for over 50 years now, and some of the most important insights into brain function have come out of studies of this group of animals. And our laboratory has pioneered the use of this bird, the plain-tailed wren, over the past couple of years to address a different set of behavioral control problems, specifically how cooperation is controlled by the brain. So let me introduce these two model systems, these two model animals. So weakly electric fish, they're about 15 centimeters long, about this long, and they have a special organ along the side and in the tail of their bodies that produces electricity, and this electricity goes out into the water around the fish. And this electricity extends maybe about a meter, sometimes up to 2 meters around the fish. And so these fish can use this electric signal to communicate with each other. If they're within a meter of each other, their electric fields will mix. And also, they use it to localize and describe objects at night in complete darkness. So they use this as a form of sensing. Now, when you go out into the wild, into the Amazon basin, and this is a study site in Ecuador, students can take a piece of wood with 2 wires, a tiny, cheap amplifier, and they can amplify the electric signals of any fish that's within a meter of the stick. And it turns out these signals they produce are in the range of frequencies that we can hear, so I can actually just play one of these recordings to you. So here's one fish. Hopefully this will work. Nope. There we go. So this particular species of fish would produce this signal, and they do that all day and all night, and they use it to localize objects in the environment and communicate among each other. Now, a recording taken right from this study site of this species, and you can hear something a little different. So there's just a bunch of fish there, and we can actually identify how many of those fish and of what species, sometimes of even what sex they are. Now, there are over 250 species that live in the Amazon basin, and they have wildly different signals. So here's another species. He's actually producing aggressive chirps at the moment. And then another very different signal. So we go down to the Amazon with our students, and we put them in canoes in the Amazon at night with sticks with wires on them, and go searching for electric fish, and we describe in very precise ways their behavior. And what is most important about this is the experience that the students have in conducting this research. This can be a life-changing experience for sure, right? So, but as exciting as that is, what's most exciting for me is then taking the insights in behavior that we've obtained from the wild and bringing students in the lab to study the neural mechanisms, the spatial temporal patterns of activity that are used in sensing and the control of their motor behavior. And this is, we use cutting-edge equipment and technologies in order to record from cells which are very tiny, 20 microns across at the biggest in our animals, to understand these spatial temporal codes. And like I said, these animals have revealed some of the most important insights into how the brain functions that have been discovered to date. Now, over the past couple years, I've been studying this newly studied species, the plain-tailed wren, and this is the range of this wren. It is limited to only a few degrees off of the equator. The equator would be right here. My study sites for the weakly electric fish are over here in the Amazon basin, and these animals live on the slopes of the Andes, very high up, on the order of something like 7,500 feet to 10,000 feet. And these animals produce an amazing behavior that is a great tool for studying how cooperation works. So they produce a duet song. They sing together. And I'm going to give you a video in the next slide. If you close your eyes, you don't have to really, it will sound like a single bird is singing. But it's not. It's 2 birds singing. And if you watch the mouths of the 2 birds, you'll be able to see that they're alternating very rapidly back and forth between each other. So the female's on the bottom. She's marked in magenta. And one more time, just for good measure. I mean, this behavior is remarkably precise, robust, and critically, it's learned. And it's learned in a way that's similar to how speech is learned. So we use the same basic kind of procedure. This is my colleague, Dr. Mel Coleman. She's at Claremont McKenna. And we place microphones, not electrodes, microphones in this case, out into the dense bamboo where these animals live, and we quantify their behavior, and then we capture a small number of these animals and do neurophysiology on them. And we've had some great insights as to the spatial temporal codes that control this cooperative behavior. Now, you might notice here, these are cinder blocks. This is a tennis ball, and this is a tile here. In order to do these experiments, you have to use, in the laboratory, typically a $7,000 to $9,000 vibration isolation table, and it turns out that tennis balls, cinder blocks, and is good enough. Okay, so now, how does this translate into sustainability, or particularly for me, environmental monitoring? And you've already figured it out. I am placing, as part of the behavioral observations, sensors into the environment. And with these sensors, sometimes complex arrays of sensors, we can measure any animal, any weakly electric fish that passes within 2 meters of this device. Or in this case, we've developed extremely inexpensive versions of this that allow us to place these into the environment and monitor non-invasively. If you think about it, measuring fish underwater is difficult. Traditionally, you take seines and you capture the fish, which sometimes can damage the habitat that you're interested in, and kill the animals as well. So this is a low-cost, non-invasive, semi-automated system for measuring these critical Amazonian habitats, the Amazon Basin being the world's largest wetland and the most species-diverse place on Earth. So a place that's worth doing environmental monitoring, and specifically biological monitoring of animals in the very habitat we're interested in. So we're hoping to deploy this more broadly across the Amazon. Now, with respect to the plain-tailed wrens, we stick these microphones out into the bamboo, but it turns out this is an extraordinarily species-diverse area. So not only do our microphones record the songs of these birds, they record the songs of over 300 species of birds that occur in this thin slice of the Andes, about 7,500 feet to over 10,000 feet, and any other animal that produces sound. So we can measure what animals are doing what vocally at any time. And this is really important, especially on the sides of mountains. On the sides of mountains, there's a really useful place to study the spatial distribution of animals, especially in relation to climate change. So here is one of these mountains. Plain-tailed wrens live on the side of Cotopaxi volcano, which is perhaps the most famous volcano in Ecuador. And this picture was taken in 1986, just a few months after my first visit to Ecuador. And you can see the snow cover is quite low, but a few years ago, 2007, it's much higher. And so you can imagine that if you live or if you have a habitat, as this warming has happened, the habitat may have moved up the side of the mountain. So as the temperature changes, animals will migrate small amounts up and down the side of the mountain, and if we place microphones there, we can quickly and easily measure their spatial response to climate change. Now, the advantage of this kind of monitoring compared to electric fish monitoring is that microphones have been available for a long time, and in fact, people like this example, Yanayaku Biological Research Station, it's on the side of one of the volcanoes, they've been taking recordings for the past 15 years using video cameras and other recording devices. So using our tools, we can immediately get a longitudinal study of the movement of animals that produce sound like birds up and down the sides of the Andes, one of these super important habitats that has the advantage of being on the slopes. But all of this research is interesting and entertaining for me, but the most important component is that we involve students in every aspect of what we do. And we not only involve students from the United States, we also involve them from Ecuador and other South American countries. And this is critical because we are teaching these students about sustainability in a very profound way. They experience not only the science that we're doing, but they interact and see the culture, the economic situation, and the political situations that affect these kinds of programs. So what is it that a university does? What does a university professor do other than try and give students those kind of life-changing, profound experiences that prepare them for a demanding and complex future? This is the cornerstone of what we do. And we do it both through research and bringing students down for short educational programs, typically in January. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to at least a small number of the people who have contributed to this work, the other institutions, our funding agencies in the US and Canada, and most importantly, I'm very proud to start working here at NJIT to develop and enlarge my program, both in research and in sustainability. So, thank you.